The king has spoken, and what he said has sent shockwaves through every corridor of Buckingham Palace, every newsroom in Britain, and every royal watchers following the saga from around the world. In a statement so direct, so stark, so utterly unprecedented coming from a sitting British monarch, King Charles looked at the cameras and delivered four devastating words that nobody inside the royal family ever expected to hear publicly. The law must take its course. Not a careful diplomatic sidestep wrapped in palace-approved language. A declaration. And those four words, sources close to the institution now confirm, were not just a statement for the press. They were the final, irreversible severing of one of the most consequential brotherhoods in the history of the House of Windsor. Because what happened on February 19th, 2026, the birthday of all days of Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, is something that royal historians are already comparing to the great crises of the 20th century. And according to insiders, what is coming next could be even more devastating than what we have already witnessed. Andrew was arrested on his 66th birthday. He was held by police for 11 hours. He was photographed, slouched in the back of a vehicle, leaving Aylsham Police Station in Norfolk like any other suspect under investigation. And now, the British government, not the palace, the government itself, is formally considering legislation that would strip him from the royal line of succession entirely. This is not speculation. This is confirmed. This is the monarchy's worst crisis in nearly a century, and it is still unfolding. Stay with us, because everything you are about to hear will leave you asking one question. How on earth did it come to this? Let's establish precisely what we are dealing with, because there is a lot happening simultaneously, and it is important to understand the full picture. According to reports confirmed by CBS News, NBC News, and the Associated Press, Andrew Mountbatten Windsor was arrested on the morning of February 19th, 2026. At shortly after 8 a.m., 6 unmarked police vehicles swept into the grounds of Wood Farm, Andrew's residence on King Charles's Sandringham estate in Norfolk. He was taken to Aylsham Police Station for questioning. Thames Valley Police confirmed the arrest in a carefully worded statement, noting they had detained a man in his 60s from Norfolk on suspicion of misconduct in public office. They did not name him. They did not need to. He was held for 11 hours, then released under investigation, meaning neither charged nor exonerated. The probe continues, and while Andrew sat in that police station, police were simultaneously conducting searches at 2 royal addresses, Wood Farm on the Sandringham estate in Norfolk, and Royal Lodge in Berkshire, the 30-room grace and favor property near Windsor Castle, where Andrew had lived for decades and from which he was evicted by his own brother just weeks earlier, on February 4th. Sources say the search at Royal Lodge was so thorough it continued for days, with unmarked vans seen entering the grounds well into the following weekend. Now here is the charge that sits at the heart of all of this. Misconduct in public office, and royal watchers, insiders, and legal experts are all making the same point. This is not the Virginia Giuffre allegation. This is entirely separate. This is a criminal matter focused specifically on what Andrew did while serving as Britain's official trade envoy between 2001 and 2011. According to documents released by the U.S. Department of Justice as part of the Epstein files, millions of pages dropped, on January 30th, there are emails indicating that Andrew forwarded confidential British government reports to Jeffrey Epstein. Reports from his official diplomatic visits to Hong Kong, Vietnam, and Singapore in 2010. Classified trade intelligence, sensitive government information, sent directly to a convicted sex offender. In England, misconduct in public office is a common law offense. According to legal experts quoted by CNN and the BBC, it concerns, in their words, serious willful abuse or neglect of the power or responsibilities of the public office held. The maximum sentence, if convicted, is life imprisonment. And here is the detail that sources say is keeping palace advisors awake at night. At least 8 separate UK police forces are now involved in examining the Epstein files. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown personally submitted a memorandum to police forces following the arrest, and investigators have begun contacting Andrew's former close protection officers, asking them to consider carefully whether anything they saw or heard during their service may be relevant. According to the Metropolitan Police, those protection officers are being asked about one specific thing: allegations that they may have turned a blind eye to Andrew's visits to Epstein's private island, Little St. James. This is no longer a contained story. It is expanding, and the palace knows it. But here is where it gets truly interesting. And to understand why Charles's statement hit the royal family like a thunderclap, you need to go back, not just to last year, not just to the Newsnight disaster, but to the full decade of choices and cover-ups that built the walls closing in on Andrew today. Andrew's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein had been publicly visible since at least 2001, when the two were first photographed together. But the first truly serious alarm bells rang in 2010, when photographs surfaced of Andrew and Epstein walking together in New York's Central Park, just months after Epstein's release from jail following his first sex offender conviction. The images caused a scandal. Questions were raised in Parliament. Andrew's position as Britain's trade envoy was suddenly under enormous pressure. He stepped down from that role in March 2011, after a decade in the position that had already earned him the unflattering nickname Air Miles Andy, due to his globetrotting at public expense. But stepping down was not enough, because sources inside the palace now confirm something that royal watchers have long suspected. The family knew more than they ever publicly acknowledged, and the choices made in those years to protect Andrew, to manage the story, to keep him within the fold, are now coming back with compounding force. The catastrophe that many believe could have been prevented came in November 2019, when Andrew agreed to give that extraordinary BBC Newsnight interview with journalist Emily Maitlis. Royal insiders describe it to this day as the single worst media appearance in the modern history of the monarchy. The sweating claim, the Pizza Express alibi for the night, Virginia Giuffre alleged the abuse occurred. The baffling assertion about an adrenaline condition from the Falklands War that supposedly meant he could not sweat. Within hours of that interview airing, the backlash was so severe, so immediate, and so total that Queen Elizabeth herself was forced to intervene. Within days, Andrew was stripped of his public royal duties. He would never carry out an official engagement again. Then, in January 2002, Virginia Giuffre filed a civil lawsuit in the United States. The palace was forced into crisis mode. Charles, sources say, was furious, not merely at Andrew's conduct, but at the cost and the risk the lawsuit posed to the institution. Andrew lost his bid to have the suit dismissed. He lost his HRH status. He lost his honorary military titles. He lost his royal patronages. And in February 2002, he settled with Giuffre for a reported $16 million, a figure, according to British media reports, that Charles helped fund. No admission of guilt was made. Giuffre, whose courage in speaking out defined the public accountability surrounding Epstein's network, died by suicide last year at 41. Following Andrew's arrest, her siblings released a statement. Sources close to the family say those words landed with tremendous weight inside the palace. They said, "Our broken hearts have been lifted at the news that no one is above the law, not even royalty. He was never a prince. For survivors everywhere, Virginia did this for you." And then came October last year. King Charles stripped his brother of his final remaining title, formally removing the designation of prince. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. That was now his full name. A private citizen in theory, but still, almost impossibly, eighth in line to the British throne. And then, on February 4th, 2026, Charles forced him out of Royal Lodge. The 30-room grace and favor home that had been Andrew's base for decades was taken back. Andrew relocated to the much more modest wood farm on the Sandringham estate. Sources described it as a humiliation disguised as an administrative decision. 15 days later, the police arrived at dawn. Now here is what nobody inside the palace fully predicted, and what sources say has made this moment so much more difficult to contain than any previous royal crisis. When Andrew was arrested, the royal family did not retreat. They did not cancel their schedules. They did not issue muted expressions of concern through a palace intermediary. King Charles attended the opening of London Fashion Week. Queen Camilla went to a lunchtime concert. Princess Anne visited a prison. And at midday, signed personally not through the usual Buckingham Palace channel, but directly as Charles R., using the Latin abbreviation for Rex, the king, the monarch's statement arrived. Royal experts were unanimous that this was not British stoicism, this was strategy. This was a deliberately choreographed signal sent to the public, to Parliament, to the media, and critically, to Andrew himself. Sources close to Clarence House confirmed that the decision to continue normal royal duties on the day of the arrest was made in advance and with clear intent. The message, insiders say, was simple and merciless. The institution is separate from this individual. The crown continues. Andrew does not. The statement itself was, by royal standards, astonishing in its directness. I have learned with the deepest concern the news about Andrew Mountbatten Windsor and suspicion of misconduct in public office. And then those four words. Let me state clearly, the law must take its course. Craig Prescott, a royal expert at Royal Holloway University of London, told reporters it was an extraordinary moment. In his words, I genuinely cannot think of a parallel close to that. He described Charles as the first monarch who genuinely has to meet modern expectations of accountability, who has to earn public support rather than assume it. And then came the confirmation that completed the picture. An aide to Prince William and Princess Catherine told NBC News that the Prince and Princess of Wales fully support the King's statement. William and Catherine, who royal watchers note have been quietly positioning themselves as the steady, accountable future of the monarchy, stood in clear alignment with Charles. Andrew, by contrast, was alone. Sources close to Andrew's circle describe his reaction to the public statement as one of devastation. He had reportedly believed, even as the arrest unfolded, that there would be some form of private intervention, a quiet call, a back channel, something. What he received instead was a declaration broadcast to the world. Insiders say he is now in a state of profound disbelief, confronting for the first time the full reality of what his choices, and his family's decision to no longer shield him from the consequences of those choices, actually mean. But even as the arrest dominated every front page and every breaking news ticker, a second, and in some ways even more consequential development, was quietly taking shape in Westminster. And this, one could define Andrew's legacy permanently. Sources now confirm that the British government is formally considering legislation to remove Andrew Mountbatten Windsor from the royal line of succession. He currently sits eighth in line to the throne, despite losing every title, every patronage, every honorary position. That succession standing has never been changed. And under British constitutional law, it can only be changed through an act of Parliament. Additionally, such a move would require the formal agreement of 14 Commonwealth nations, because succession law applies across the Commonwealth, not just within the United Kingdom. Royal experts are describing this as genuinely unprecedented territory, and sources say the will to move is there. Liberal Democrat leader Ed Davey told reporters that Parliament will have to consider this issue when the time is right, to ensure Andrew can never become king. That language, can never become king, is being interpreted by insiders as a signal that cross-party political momentum is already building. The 14 Commonwealth nations piece is more complex. Sources familiar with those diplomatic conversations describe quiet consultations already underway. Whether unanimous agreement can be secured quickly is an open question. But sources say the directional pull is clear. What is making palace advisors most anxious, however, is a question that royal correspondent Peter Hunt raised publicly, and that sources say is now live inside government briefings. Were questions ever raised internally about Andrew's conduct as trade envoy during those 10 years? If so, who raised them? What was done? Were there warnings that were ignored? And most dangerously, are there files? Former BBC royal correspondent Hunt framed it starkly. The best possible outcome for the monarchy is for the police investigation to remain narrowly focused on what is already established. The worst outcome would be if investigators begin asking what the broader institution may have known about Andrew's conduct, and when. Sources say that question is now being taken extremely seriously. Because if the investigation expands, if police begin examining what palace officials knew, what was flagged internally, what was buried, the House of Windsor itself moves into genuinely new and deeply uncomfortable legal territory. And the implications for Andrew personally could not be more stark. But before we get there, let us talk about something that royal watchers say is being almost entirely underreported: the scale of the public and political reaction in Britain, and what it tells us about where the monarchy goes from here. The public response in the hours following the arrest was, by any measure, extraordinary. In London, people gathered near newsstands as Friday's front pages went up, every single paper leading with Andrew's photograph. A journalist photographed members of the public reading those headlines with expressions of open astonishment. Citizens interviewed outside Buckingham Palace used words like "finally" and "overdue." One man, Maxim Kirichuk, told reporters he was quite celebratory when he heard the news. He said he hoped that through this, the public gets information that has been secret for so long. Others were more cautious, expressing concern that the investigation would not ultimately produce charges. But the overwhelming mood, reporters confirmed, was one of stunned disbelief that the moment had actually arrived. Anti-monarchy organization Republic, whose CEO Graham Smith has spent years challenging the reach of the royal family, released a statement saying they honestly didn't think this day would come. Smith added that the monarchy appeared to be in deep, deep trouble just 3 years since Queen Elizabeth's death. Republic has already announced plans to stage a protest at the Commonwealth Day service on March 9th, arguing that the public is now questioning the very institution itself. That is language that sources say is being monitored very closely inside Buckingham Palace. Body language experts, royal correspondents, and constitutional scholars are all making the same observation. The optics of Andrew leaving that police station, slouched, visibly deflated, photographed by a Reuters journalist who had quietly positioned himself outside and waited, are images that cannot be walked back. Every future royal portrait, every state occasion, will now exist in the shadow of those images. NBC News royal commentator Daisy McAndrew went further than most, telling her audience that this moment is in many ways more serious for the royal family than the crisis it faced after the death of Princess Diana. That is a significant claim, but sources inside the palace, speaking anonymously, are not disputing it. Because when you look at where Andrew actually stands right now, the picture is almost unimaginable for a man who spent 6 decades inside the protective embrace of the world's most famous monarchy. No title, no official role, no patronages. His 30-room home, Royal Lodge, seized back by the family and now under active police search. Relocated to the far more modest Wood Farm. His brother, the king, publicly declaring the law must take its course. His brother's heir, William, publicly backing that statement. His protection officers being contacted by the Metropolitan Police and asked what they witnessed. And a criminal investigation that, if it results in conviction, carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment. Sources describe Andrew as someone who spent his entire adult life operating under a set of assumptions that no longer hold. The assumption that blood protected blood. The assumption that the institution's instinct for self-preservation would always ultimately align with protecting one of its own. The assumption that the family would find a way, as it always had before, to manage the story, to contain the damage, to buy time. What the events of February 19th made devastatingly clear is that those assumptions are gone. The calculation inside the palace has permanently shifted. Sources say Charles's advisors were explicit with him in the weeks before the arrest. Any attempt at private intervention, once Andrew was detained, would itself become a scandal of equal or greater magnitude. The only defensible position, they told him, was radical and total distance. And Charles, sources say, accepted that without hesitation. The image that keeps circulating, Andrew, photographed by Reuters journalist Phil Noble, slouched in the back of a car as he left Aylsham police station 11 hours after his arrest, is being described by royal watchers as one of the defining images in the modern history of the British monarchy. A man who was born a prince, who flew fighter jets, who served in the Falklands War, who attended every state occasion, every royal wedding, every Christmas at Sandringham for 6 decades, photographed like a suspect, because, for the first time in his life, that is precisely what he is. What happens next is going to reshape the British monarchy for a generation. And all eyes are now on several developments simultaneously. The police investigation is ongoing and is not expected to conclude quickly. The search at Royal Lodge was expected to continue through the weekend. Former close protection officers are being contacted and questioned. At least 8 UK police forces remain involved. And critically, sources say investigators are not merely focused on the trade envoy emails. They are building a broader picture of Andrew's conduct, his movements, his contacts, and crucially, what those around him may have known. The parliamentary process around succession removal is in motion, but complex. The 14 Commonwealth nations must agree. Cross-party support appears to be forming. The question of timing, whether to move before any criminal proceedings, during them, or after, is being actively debated in Westminster. And in a development that royals watchers say nobody saw coming, and that dramatically widens the entire Epstein picture in Britain, sources confirmed that police are also examining whether former senior Labour politician Peter Mandelson, who served as British ambassador to the United States, may have shared sensitive documents with Epstein. Mandelson, who was dismissed from the ambassadorial post by Prime Minister Keir Starmer earlier this year, denies all wrongdoing, but his involvement in the Epstein files has now been confirmed. Andrew, sources suggest, was the first domino. He may not be the last. Prime Minister Keir Starmer, speaking before the arrest was officially confirmed, delivered language that insiders say set the political tone for everything that followed. Nobody is above the law. Those were his exact words. And when asked whether Andrew should testify regarding the Epstein files, Starmer said yes. Anybody who has any information should testify, whether it is Andrew or anybody else. Nobody is above the law. The law must take its course. This is only the beginning. The fallout will ripple through the monarchy for years. For every question the palace manages to answer, new ones will emerge. About what was known, about who chose to look away, about whether the instinct to protect family and the obligation to serve the public can ever truly coexist inside the House of Windsor. Andrew Mountbatten Windsor spent 66 years believing the answer was yes. He got his answer on his birthday, in the back of an unmarked car, leaving a police station in Norfolk. We will be watching every development as it breaks. So, what do you think? Has King Charles done the right thing by refusing to protect his brother? Or has the monarchy crossed a line that will permanently alter the relationship between the crown and its own family? Let us know in the comments below. The debate is already raging, and we want to hear from you. If you are not already subscribed, now is the time. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because this story is moving by the hour, and we will have everything for you the moment it breaks. This story is far from over. In fact, it may just be getting started.